Never let your kids go to summer camp in Appalachia. In June of 2013, Ranger Halloway was driving the back roads along the Kittatinny Ridge, deep in the Appalachian Mountains of northeastern Pennsylvania, when a 15-year-old girl broke out of the tree line and slammed both hands on his hood, screaming 3 words that opened a case file he has never closed. He has Gerald. Her name was Rebecca, and the first thing Halloway noticed, before he even got the car in park, was the camp lanyard still zip-tied to her wrist. One shoe was gone. A rubber bracelet on her other hand read, Cabin 4, and it was smeared with something dark down one edge. She couldn't get a full sentence out. She just kept saying his name, over and over, like it was the only word she had left. Halloway had been working this county for 11 years. He knew every hollow, every fire road, every place a hiker could get turned around and found again by morning. He did not know what was behind Camp Kittatinny. Nobody did. That was about to become a problem. He'd already started turning the car toward the highway when a second shape staggered out of the same gap in the trees. Gerald, alive, upright, walking on his own power. Halloway should have felt relief looking at that boy. Instead, the hair on his arm stood straight up, because Gerald wasn't looking at the road, and he wasn't looking at the ranger, and he wasn't looking at Rebecca either. He was staring back at the exact spot he'd just walked out of, the way a dog stares at a door it isn't sure got shut all the way. Rebecca grabbed the boy's sleeve and hauled him toward the car door, and that's when Halloway caught the smell coming off both of them. Something like wet stone and old motor oil, a smell that didn't belong anywhere near a summer camp. He'd get to that smell later. It would come back to him at 3 in the morning for weeks after, long after this case sat closed on his desk. Right now he had 2 kids in the back seat and a radio that needed a call put through. What he didn't know yet, and what would end up mattering more than anything else in his report, was what those 2 teenagers had walked away from that morning wasn't the worst part. The worst part was who they'd left behind. 12 hours earlier, Camp Kittatinny had been exactly what it was supposed to be. Smoke curling off a dying bonfire, counselors trading jokes after lights out, the kind that get funnier the more tired everybody gets. Somebody's walkie sitting on a picnic table at 34% battery, forgotten, still on. Wrappers from the last round of s'mores stuffed half in, half out of the fire pit. It was a Tuesday. Nothing about it felt like the start of anything. Rebecca had been the one to hear it first. Footsteps outside Cabin 4, slow, deliberate, stopping right under the window. She sat up, waited, listened for it to happen again. It didn't. The footsteps outside had already stopped. What she didn't clock, not for a long time after, was that something inside the cabin wall was still moving. She almost woke Gerald in the next bunk. Almost. Then she told herself it was a raccoon working the crawl space, the same story every counselor gave every summer, and she pulled the blanket back up to her chin. She was wrong about the raccoon. She'd find out exactly how wrong before the sun came up again. By the time the sun actually came up over Kittatinny Ridge, nobody had said a word about the footsteps. Rebecca hadn't mentioned it at breakfast. Gerald hadn't either, mostly because he'd slept through the whole thing, snoring 2 bunks down, while she lay there staring at the ceiling until it got light. Breakfast was pancakes and bug spray and somebody's radio playing staticky country music. Normal, boring even. The kind of morning that makes what happens later feel like it's happening to somebody else's summer. It was Kyle who brought up the raccoon theory, laughing about it, and for a second Rebecca almost believed him. Camps had raccoons, Raccoons got into walls. That was just a fact of camping, like poison ivy or bad Wi-Fi. She was wrong, and some part of her already knew it. That night it happened again, except this time it wasn't just footsteps. Rebecca woke up at 12:40 to the sound of something moving down the hallway of the cabin, past the bunks toward the far window. Slow steps, even steps. Steps that didn't sound like they belonged to anyone in cabin 4 because everyone in cabin 4 was already asleep. She didn't move. She counted the steps instead because counting felt like doing something. 7 steps. Then nothing. Here's the detail that mattered later, the one none of them clocked in the moment. The steps hadn't stopped because whoever was making them had stopped walking. They'd stopped because whoever was making them had turned to look at the bunks. Rebecca didn't know that yet. All she knew was that the silence afterward felt different than the silence before it. Like the air itself had decided to hold still and watch. 30 minutes later, at the far end of the hall, something moved past the exit door. Gerald saw it first. He'd gotten up to use the bathroom, half asleep, thinking about nothing except getting back under his blanket. And there, silhouetted against the emergency light above the door, was a shape that stood the way a person stands until it didn't. Its shoulders sat wrong. Too wide on one side, folded in on the other, like something underneath had healed crooked a long time ago and never lined back up. Gerald blinked and it was gone. Not through the door. The door was locked, chained the same way it got chained every night by whichever counselor did the last walkthrough. Gerald checked twice. The window above the door, the one that only opened from the inside because the latch had been painted shut for years, was hanging open 6 inches, curtain moving in a breeze that shouldn't have existed inside a sealed cabin. He didn't tell anyone that night. He told himself it was a trick of the emergency light, a shadow off a coat rack. Anything. That's the story he was still telling himself the next morning when he mentioned it to Rebecca, low over breakfast, like it embarrassed him to say out loud. She believed him instantly. That scared her more than the story itself. They weren't the only ones who noticed something was off. Mr. Purdy, the camp's groundskeeper, had been raking the fire pit when he overheard the two of them talking about the window. He stopped raking. His face went the color of old dishwater. "The judge don't like trespassers," he said. Just that. Then he walked off toward the tool shed without looking back, like he hadn't said anything at all. Neither of them asked what he meant. 12-year-olds don't interrogate groundskeepers, and 15-year-olds have already learned that adults who look that spooked usually don't want to be pressed. By lunch, the whole thing had been folded into camp legend. A counselor logged it in the incident book as probable wildlife, the same phrase used every year for every strange noise anybody ever heard on this ridge. Case closed as far as Camp Kittatinny was concerned. Rebecca wasn't so sure. And 200 yards past the tree line, in a spot none of the campers had any reason to walk toward, the ground held a secret that had been waiting a lot longer than one summer to be found. The dare happened because Kyle wanted views. He'd been filming little clips all week for some account nobody else at camp actually followed, and when he caught a flash of movement past the tree line that afternoon, a shape ducking low and fast between two trunks, he didn't think twice. He grabbed his phone and went after it. Rebecca and Gerald weren't trying to explore anything. They went after Kyle because that's what you do when your friend bolts off camp property, chasing something neither of them could clearly see. Somebody had to drag him back before a counselor noticed he was gone. They followed his voice a quarter-mile past the property line, through brush that hadn't been cleared in years, until the trees opened up onto a stretch of ground that didn't belong there. Sunken stone markers, maybe 20 of them, most so old the names had worn smooth. An unmarked graveyard, tucked into a fold of the ridge like the mountain itself had been hiding it. One mound sat apart from the rest. Fresher dirt, no stone. It didn't match anything else in that clearing. Not the age, not the shape, not the way the grass around it hadn't fully grown back yet. Nobody looked at it twice. That would matter later. Kyle was already crouched by the far tree line, phone up, grinning like this was the best thing that had happened to him all summer. 12:47, he said, checking his screen. Back by 1:47 or you both owe me $20. Rebecca didn't laugh. This isn't a dare, Kyle. We're not even supposed to be out here. Then go back. He was already backing toward the trees, phone still recording. I'm getting this on camera whether you're here or not. He disappeared into the brush before either of them could argue further. That left Rebecca standing in a graveyard nobody at camp knew existed, staring at Gerald, who hadn't said a word since they'd crossed the property line. He shouldn't be alone out here, she said. Neither should you. We should both go. Gerald shook his head. Somebody needs to actually watch the time. He's not going to check it himself, she argued. Gerald had already found a flat stone to sit on, arms wrapped around his knees, and something in his face told her the conversation was over before it started. She left him there because chasing Kyle down alone felt like the faster option, and because 12-year-olds don't always win arguments with 15-year-olds, even when they're right. She'd think about that decision for years, whether leaving him there was the mistake, or whether it was ever going to happen no matter what any of them chose. The graveyard went quiet behind her as she walked off after Kyle's voice, birds still going, wind still moving through the leaves, same as always. Gerald sat alone on his rock, phone in his lap, watching the clock count down from an hour like it was just another dare. 20 minutes in, he heard something behind him. Not footsteps exactly. More like the sound of weight being set down carefully, one shift at a time, the way somebody moves when they don't want to be heard. He turned around. Nothing. Just trees and the fresh mound with no stone and a stretch of shadow underneath the low branches that hadn't seemed that dark a minute ago. He checked the time. 12:51. 56 minutes left on Kyle's clock. He told himself it was a squirrel. Deer, maybe. Something small enough that being alone with it wasn't actually a problem. The leaves shifted again, closer this time, and Gerald realized the sound wasn't coming from one direction anymore. It was coming from two. He stood up fast, knocking the phone off his lap, and grabbed the only thing within reach that felt like a weapon. A broken chair leg someone had dumped near the tree line years ago, half buried in old leaves. He didn't know why it was there. He didn't have time to wonder. Whatever was moving through the brush wasn't rushing. That was the part that got to him most. It had all the time in the world, and it knew it. Kyle blasted the fire extinguisher first. He'd made it back to cabin 4 at 1:20, 27 minutes early, phone still in his hand, footage still rolling, when the hallway light flickered and something stepped out of the bathroom doorway that had no business being tall enough to duck under the frame the way it did. It wasn't stalking. Stalking implies caution. This thing moved down the hallway like it already knew exactly how the next 30 seconds were going to go, and it was in no hurry to find out if it was right. Kyle grabbed the extinguisher off the wall bracket and let it loose, full blast, white powder filling the hall from floor to ceiling. It didn't slow down. A hand came out of the cloud and caught Kyle across the chest, backhanded him into the bunk frame hard enough to buckle the metal, and by the time Rebecca got the bathroom door open to see what was happening, Kyle was on the floor, and something had her by the arm. The grip left marks. 4 fingers, 1 thumb, pressed hard enough into her skin that she'd carry the bruises for 2 weeks after, dark and finger-shaped, The kind that make a school nurse ask questions you don't have good answers for. She didn't call for security. Neither of them did. They'd both understood, somewhere underneath the panic, that calling for help meant waiting for help, and waiting wasn't something either of them had time for anymore. It had already touched them. That changed the math completely. They ran, straight out the cabin door, past the fire pit, past the tool shed, toward the tree line, because the tree line was the only direction that didn't lead back toward whatever had just come out of that bathroom. Back at the graveyard, Gerald's hour had run out 3 minutes ago. The fresh mound wasn't a mound anymore. It was a hatch, wooden, warped, standing half open with drag marks cut into the dirt on either side, deep grooves like something heavy had been pulled across that ground more than once. Gerald knew he shouldn't go down. He went down anyway because Kyle still hadn't come back, and because the alternative was standing alone in a graveyard with something moving through the trees behind him. The tunnel dropped steep, packed earth walls giving way to old timber supports, and then, all at once, a room. Rotted barrels stacked 3 high, a copper still, corroded green, tipped on its side. Chains bolted into the far wall, thick iron links gone orange with rust, hanging empty. The smell hit him before his eyes adjusted. Old oak soaked through with kerosene, so thick he could taste it on the back of his tongue. This was where the judge had kept people. Gerald understood that the second he saw the chains, the same way you understand a stovetop is hot before you've touched it. The chains were empty. That should have been good news. It wasn't, because something in the room was breathing, slow and even, and it wasn't him. He turned. The masked man filled the tunnel entrance behind him, blocking the only way out, not moving yet, just standing there the way a door stands when it's already decided to close. Gerald swung the chair leg. It connected somewhere near the man's shoulder, a solid hit that should have dropped anyone, and the man barely staggered, barely even acknowledged it happened, like pain was something that belonged to other people. 3 seconds. That was the window Gerald had, and he took it, ducking under the man's arm and bolting deeper into the tunnel, away from the entrance, toward a fork he hadn't noticed until he was already inside it. Rebecca and Gerald hit that fork from opposite directions at nearly the same moment, her chest heaving from the run, him already bleeding from a cut above his eyebrow he didn't remember getting. Kyle wasn't with either of them. Kyle had taken the left branch alone, phone lights swinging wild across the tunnel walls, and somewhere behind them both, cut off mid-sentence by something that wasn't the tunnel collapsing, his voice stopped. They didn't go back for him. There wasn't time, and some choices don't feel like choices at all. They just feel like the only thing your body will let you do. They broke the surface 100 yards from where they'd gone in, gasping, and behind them, unhurried, like he'd walked this ground 1,000 times before either of them was born, the man kept coming. Rebecca ran until she hit the tree line by the back road, until headlights swung into view, until a ranger's cruiser was slowing down in front of her. Gerald staggered out 3 seconds behind her. Kyle did not. Backup found the graveyard by dusk. They found the hatch too, still standing open, drag marks still cut into the dirt exactly where Gerald had seen them. Deputies went down with flashlights and came back up an hour later with the same 3 things Halloway already knew were coming: the rotted barrels, the copper still, the empty chains. No man, no Kyle, no second exit anywhere in that tunnel system, which meant whoever had been down there either knew a way out that nobody else could find, or was still down there, somewhere past where the flashlights reached. Mr. Purdy didn't say much when they brought him in for questioning. He sat across the table from Halloway for a long time before he said anything at all, and when he finally talked, it came out like something he'd been carrying so long he'd almost forgotten how heavy it was. The land had been condemned back in the 1930s, he said. People went missing around that ridge for years before anybody official did anything about it. All of it tied back to a bootlegger who ran his operation out of the hollow and answered to nobody. Not the law, not his own men, not anybody living or dead. Folks around here just called him the judge, because that's what he acted like, judge and jury both, and nobody who crossed him ever got the chance to argue their case. The county bought the land 40 years later, cheap, because nobody local wanted it, and the state needed a spot for a camp. By then, most people who remembered why that ground was bad had died or moved off, and the ones who stayed didn't talk about it, and eventually there was nobody left to tell the new owners not to build there. Purdy stopped talking after that. Whatever else he knew, he kept it, and Halloway didn't push, because some people you can tell have already given you everything they're going to give. Halloway drove Rebecca and Gerald home himself 3 days later, after the interviews were done and the paperwork was filed. Neither of them talked much on the ride. Gerald kept looking out the window at the tree line running alongside the highway. The way you look at something you're not sure has stopped looking back at you. Rebecca asked him once, quiet, whether he remembered anything else from the tunnel. He said no. She didn't believe him, and she never brought it up again. The case stayed open. It still is. No trace of Kyle was ever found, not in the tunnel, not on the ridge, not anywhere in the 11 years since. His mother still calls the station sometimes, every June, around the anniversary, and Halloway still doesn't have anything new to tell her. There's one thing that stayed with him longer than almost anything else in that file. That fresh mound in the graveyard, the one none of the kids looked at twice, the one that didn't match the age or the shape of anything around it. Nobody ever went back to check what was underneath it. It's still out there, waiting, same as it was that afternoon. Pennsylvania alone has hundreds of unmapped Prohibition-era distilleries buried across these mountains, most of them nothing now but holes in the ground, forgotten the same way Camp Kittatinny almost forgot what it was built next to. Most of them, anyway. And every summer, camps just like it reopen their gates less than a mile from ground nobody ever told them not to walk.